Let's jump into the two questions. So the first question was tithing and offering. So any question, just basically like, what is it? Why do we do it? How do we accomplish it? Biblically, where does this stuff come from? Which I think is a great question, because it's something that talking about money is never fun, unless you really like that. But I don't. I don't like talking about money. Yes, I did just check my hair and I'm fixing it in front of you, and I just realized that that's embarrassing. Um, but yeah, no one really loves talking about it, and especially as a pastor, it's like, hey, give me money. Like, it's just uncomfortable to talk about because it is money, and money just makes people weird. And so people just get a little uncomfortable talking about it, which I'm totally in that. My uncle ran a camp for a while, and it became very obvious to him. He's like, this is hard for me because 90% of my job is going around and asking people for money, and I just can't do it. So totally understand. So the question is like, what do we do about, and what is the biblical idea behind tithing and offering? So let's talk about that. There are a ton of texts that talk about giving, but the concept of a tithe comes from the Old Testament. Tithe actually just means tenth. And so the people of Israel were commanded to give a tenth of all that they had to God. They were to pull away a tenth of what they had and give that to God. And so we see that tithe shows up in the story of Abraham and Melchizedek, which we talked about last week, and then we were talking a lot about Melchizedek in our Sunday series before all this happened. Those were the good old days, right? I really hope you guys are excited to get back to church, because I am dying to get back together with all of you. I can't even express how much I miss not most. That sounds terrible. Miss all of you. But like, I miss what we had. So I'm just anxiously awaiting to go back. Anyway, it talks a lot of tithing and offering. It comes into, so there's a tithe, which means tenth. And so this is a giving of a tenth of what you have up to God, or giving it back to God. And it really image God has given us so much, so it is not hard for us to give a tenth back to God. And so that started in the Old Testament, was a tithe. And then they talk a lot about giving a tithe. Actually, in the book of Malachi, the people of Israel are, they're actually condemned by God for not giving this tithe. So God took it very seriously that you gave a tenth of what you had back to him. And it's not as if that wouldn't be, he wouldn't be worthy of that. Like, obviously he's worthy of that. He gave you everything you have, including the breath that you just took. So it's not as if he's not worthy of it. So he commanded that people would give a tithe, but that tithe was a part of the Mosaic law. So the Mosaic law is the law that when Jesus died, he had satisfied that law. So that law is not on top of or in charge of us anymore. So we're freed from that law. So then that's where the big debate comes in: is should Christians tithe? Are we commanded to tithe? Are we not commanded to tithe? Is it just giving an offering? Because that's what the New Testament talks about. So as an offering, just a new idea of what tithing is. So there's this massive debate. The Gospel Coalition actually has an article of two people writing the opposite side of each of the coin of yes, we should, and yes, we should, or no, we shouldn't. And both of them are well-respected theologians. Both of them are people that you should trust and listen to. And so there's kind of some back and forth on this concept. But when Tom Schreiner says something, I usually tend to believe what he says over other people, because he's amazing. He wrote what is widely considered one of the best commentaries ever on Romans, which I have right here sitting next to me. And he's just awesome. So I tend to more believe what he says, which is that we as Christians, the command of a tithe you have, but it's not along the same lines of what the Old Testament people had, because we are no longer under the Old Covenant. I just noticed some new people jumped on. So when you jump on, if you could comment your name so we know who's in, that'd be great. Anyway, so that there's kind of some background to what a tithe is. And now the New Testament, we are called to give an offering. And so tithing and offering, you can almost put them two together, and getting stuck on them theologically is kind of a semantics debate. So it's not as if you need to be all concerned about that, but I have to explain things because I need them explained. I'm not very smart, so I need to thoroughly understand something before I explain it to other people. So, well, in the Bible, however, we are called at many times to support those who preach the gospel as pastors. Matthew 10:10, Luke 10:7, 1 Corinthians 9:6 through 14, 1 Timothy 5:17 through 18, just a couple examples. of what's going on. And while we enjoy the things that God has given us, we are commanded to then give back and to give generously to those who are in need. And we do that because wealth can easily become an idol. Jesus says it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than a rich man to enter into heaven, because when you have a lot of wealth, that becomes something easy to rest on, as opposed to resting and trusting in God. So it's easy to fall into that. So we are called to give to God. And then I was doing some Googling and some watching on this topic as I was preparing to talk to you guys. And there's a really helpful Q&A session on TGC, the Gospel Coalition's website, between two very, very smart people who are way smarter than I'll ever be. So you can watch them. And so they did just like, what is offering? Why do we give it? All this type of stuff. And this guy gave three observations, I guess you would say, biblically about tithing, or about giving and offering. And he says we're called to give cheerfully, to give according to our needs, but generously. So generously, but according to our needs. And then that giving should be focused in on our local church. So we're called to give our offerings. We're called to give them cheerfully. We're called to give them generously. We're called to give according to our needs. So, and we can see this is shown in a story that we're going to read here in a little bit about from the life of Jesus. But when it comes to giving, it's not as if there's an option to not do it. The call is, and the assumption in the Bible is that you are giving, but it's generously, cheerfully, and mindful of your own abilities. So if you only have a quarter and you need that quarter to live, tithing a part of that is probably wise. You're not going to be able to tithe as much as maybe someone who makes $1 million a year. So it's not necessarily about the amount, which is what we're going to get to. This is kind of a good transition. God is more concerned, as with most things, as with all things, God is far more concerned with the heart than the amount. When it comes to giving, God's far more concerned about your heart behind it. What is going on in your heart? Are you giving cheerfully? Are you giving generously? Are you giving according to your needs, rather than did the dollar amount meet God's requirement? God is far more concerned with, are you giving because you love God and because you're happy to give back to him, because everything you have is a gift from him. So you are happy to give it back. You're cheerfully giving, giving generously, saying, I could give this much and get away with it, but I have been made rich in Christ. So I am willing to give some, maybe a little bit extra, to the glory of God. And then I love that this guy in particular focuses on the local church, because that really is the context in which we're called to give, mainly is to the local church to which we are a part of, which we are all a part of one, because we're together in this group, which our church does an amazing job at. Really fantastic. The pastors and I, all of us, have just been so pleased by how gracious and generous God has been through our church. So our church is a fantastic church in this. They really do understand this idea. And so look to the people in our church as a good example for this. But again, God is far more concerned with the heart behind it than the amount. Where's my Bible? My Bible's in here because I was just using it to teach. I just don't know where I put it. There it is. If you have a Bible with you, or at least you have your phone by you, or you can use it to get to this, Mark chapter 12. Mark chapter 12. There's not 41 verses here, but chapter 12, verse 41. And he sat down opposite the treasury and watched the people putting money into the offering box. Many rich people put in large sums, and a poor widow came and put in 2 small copper coins, which makes a penny. And he called the disciples and said to them, truly I say to you, this poor widow has put in more than all of those who are contributing to the offering box. For they all contributed out of their abundance, but she out of her poverty has put in everything she had and all she had to live on. We see here God's far more concerned about the heart that this woman had, that she was going to give generously, because she knew that what I give, God's going to take care of me. And so I'm going to give, but I know that God's going to take care of me. So these people who gave a ton, he's like, yeah, it's easy for them to give a ton. They make a ton. But she gave sacrificially. She gave out of her heart that loved God and was trusting in him to say, I'm going to give reasonably, but knowing that God is going to take care of me. In faith, she was giving all that she had. And then we give, if you'll take your Bible too, if you have it, and go to 2 Corinthians chapter 8. This is an amazing text here on what it looks like to give, and the real reason behind it. All the reasons that we have are really ultimately summed up when we do it because of what Jesus has done for us. But this one Paul puts just so beautifully. Verse 7 here of 2 Corinthians chapter 8. So 2 Corinthians 8, verse 7. But as you excel in everything, in faith and speech and knowledge, in all earnestness and in love for you, see that you excel in this act of grace also. The act of grace as in giving, this act of grace also. I say this not as a command, but to prove by the earnestness of others that your love also is genuine. For you know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, yet for your sake he became poor, so that you by his poverty might become rich. See here, all that God has done for us. He was rich, he became poor for on our behalf spiritually. We are called to give to those who might not have. So giving in terms of giving to the church, giving sacrificially, faithfully, but also giving. In this context, Paul was writing to the Corinthians to give to another church in the area who had needs. So to be mindful of giving to your church because we love God, but then also being mindful of their needs that other people have that we might be willing to meet as we give generously. So there's kind of a quick 10-minute look at what does the Bible say about giving, tithing, and then how do we approach that. So just in summary for you, we approach that. We give because of all that Jesus has done for us. We give because God has blessed us with everything that we have. We give with a cheerful heart. We give with a generous heart. And we give, and we understand that God is far more concerned about our heart behind it than the dollar amount that we're able to give. Because God understands your limitations and he knows what you can and cannot give. And so as you give according to what you have, it is about your heart, not necessarily about how many zeros are in your check every week that you give to the church. Because you can give a ton of money to the church and have your heart far from God, and God's not like, that's the example. Because you can see, even Jesus said, all these people have given a ton, but I'm much more impressed by the lady who gave 1 cent than I am about the guy who gave thousands of dollars. And so it is ultimately about the heart behind it. And that's not an excuse to say, well, now I only have to give a quarter every week. That's not it. It's about your heart behind it and giving according to what God has done for you. So there's a quick summary of that. Now, there is a lot more to dig into. There's a lot more to look at. So I hope that you guys will take that and maybe your curiosity is piqued and you'll look at it more, because you can give in this station in life. That's one thing that, as I was listening to some people talking about this, they said that they don't necessarily do like a ton of preaching from the pulpit about giving, but in their church's discipleship, they actually ask, how are you giving? How, not necessarily how much, but how regularly are you giving, and are you giving? And that was to high school and college age people. And so I think it's something that you are able to do. Say, I don't have any money. But if you make, if you're shoveling driveways or mowing lawns, or all the money, out of that money that you make, to give some back to God as we give to the local church. And you say, you're a pastor, you just want my money. No, I want you to obey God. And I just so happen to work at the church you'd be giving to. But this is something that I wish I had made a better practice of when I was growing up, because I did mow lawns, I did shovel driveways, I did do, little odds and ends work for people, and I got paid. And it would have been much better for me to give of that and to not be stingy with it, because when I was stingy with it, I basically just wasted it on candy. And giving it to God for the work of the gospel is much greater than Skittles. So I should have grown from that. So learn from my foolish mistakes, and don't be as dumb as your pastor was when he was your age. So then the other question had to do with the wrath of God, the anger of God, and then like, what is righteous anger? And this has been something I've always been fascinated by, because my previous church and you guys here have asked me about righteous anger multiple times. And it's fascinating to me, because I think it's because anger we know so clearly is a sin. And so maybe it's just like, okay, so there's a way that there's a righteous sin like that. Maybe that just piques your interest, and that's why you're fascinated by that. I don't necessarily know. It's great regardless. I'm thankful for the curiosity. Well, so let's approach this one at a time. So let's look at righteous anger. We'll take that first. So righteous anger. We are called in the Bible to be angry and do not sin. And so there's a way in which you can be angry without sinning. And so righteous anger does exist. Righteous anger exists because we see Jesus getting angry. If you look at in your Bibles, I'll reference this for you, but it says here, Jesus entered the temple courts and drove out all that were buying and selling there. He overturned the tables of the money changers and benches of those selling doves. It is written, he said to them, my house will be called a house of prayer, but you are making it a den of robbers. Obviously, Jesus didn't do this calmly. Most of you don't flip tables calmly. Most of you don't yell at people calmly. We see in other recordings of the story that Jesus made a whip of cords. So he got some ropes together and started whipping on people for doing this. You don't usually do that when you're happy. He was angry. He really was stirred up and angry. We see when David goes out to fight Goliath. Goliath was blaspheming the name of God, and it made David mad enough to go kill him. Like he was mad, but he was angry about God's name being defiled. He was angry at something that God would be angry at. And that's really the key. Like, what does righteous anger look like? It's like if you could see, or you can prove from the Bible that God in his perfect character, his anger would be turned against something like this, then you have some liberties. But we're going to explain that in more detail. But your parents asking you to pick up your room when you're in the middle of a Fortnite game or playing video games and you're angry at them, that's not righteous. Your friends saying something that you don't really love, that's not righteous anger. 9 times out of 10, our anger is really not going to be very righteous. And so we need to be less concerned about, is my anger righteous, and more just, why am I angry? If I'm always angry, maybe let's not try to find ways to justify the anger. Maybe let's try to fix the heart that's always angry. And we talked a little bit about that on a Wednesday night before all this stuff happened. So you can go back and look at your notes if you want more teaching on that. So we're called to be angry and not sin. We see that Jesus did this. We see that David did this. But the reason why they did that is because they were defiling the name of God, or the house of God. There was an act against the glory of God and the fame of God, and they stepped in and interceded. They were angry about that, and that anger led them to an action that was not considered sin. So we see that Jesus had to go flip these tables and get their attention, because him saying, hey guys, could you stop? Clearly wasn't going to cut the cheddar. They were in the temple exchanging money and selling stuff. They had made some, let's just say that honoring God wasn't exactly on their highest priority chain at this point. If they're doing that, they've taken some jumps to get away from glorifying God. So Jesus knew there had to be an action that was going to go after them. And so we have this. Sorry, I just saw a text message from someone that I usually need to check if they text me. So don't mind that. And so we see that this anger led them to this action that God was okay with. Like, God was okay with what happened after what Jesus did. And so you need to look at it and say, okay, I'm feeling this anger. If what I go do, would God sanction this and say I'm totally fine with it? 9 times out of 10, the answer is going to be no. But there are situations that we look and say, okay, if I'm angry at what God is angry at, also keeping in mind that when God is angry, he is perfectly loving, merciful, and gracious at the same time. So though he is angry at sin, he is still loving those who are doing the sin. We can see that David violated God's law by sleeping with Bathsheba and with killing Uriah. That's obviously the adulterer murder double is not a good thing to do. The adultery murder combo is not a good combo to be a part of. God was angry at David's sin, but God still loved David. God, in his anger, though he was angry at that sin, didn't go punch David in the face. He forgave him. He gave him mercy and grace and love, and still called him a man after his own heart. And when David repented and apologized, he forgave him. And so though you look at a text like in Proverbs, it says there are 6 things that the Lord hates, 7 that are an abomination to him: haughty eyes, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked plans, feet that make haste to run to evil, a false witness who breathes out lies, and one who sows discord among the brothers. Those are things that God hates. So it is okay for us to hate those as well. Like we should hate gossip. We should hate killing of innocent people. Like the abortion stuff that's going on should drive us nuts. Like that should make us angry. That is people murdering innocent babies. Like that should stir up in us a reaction that we don't like that. That's okay. But to then say, because I don't like that, I will go out and I will hate everyone who's ever been okay with abortion. That's where your actions are no longer okay, because God still loves those people. And so our saying, look, I hate when people gossip. Okay, we can hate gossip, but also love gossipers, because we are called to hate the sin and love the sinner. Because those people, they need us to love them, to bring them back to truth, not to hate them and drive them farther away from truth, right? So you can see our righteous anger is, it's hard for us to be righteously angry like God, because when God was fully angry and when his wrath and his justice are fully on display, he doesn't lose his love, his mercy, his forgiveness. Though those things can't be separated. He is perfectly 100% just, holy, wrathful, loving, merciful, gracious, all of those things. He is all of them all the time perfectly. We are not. Usually when we get angry, our graciousness meter is going down. Usually when we're angry, our kindness goes down. Usually when we're angry, our words kind of ratchet up and we get a little yelly and we get a little snarky and we get defensive. And so we have to be very careful to really just rush to calling anything righteous anger, and be really careful with that idea, because righteous anger, really, it's there, it's possible, but it's one of those things that I wouldn't run to just call, if you're ticked off, righteous anger. I'd be very hesitant to do that. And so when it comes down to it, is what you're angry at something that's God is angry at? And will the actions that you are about to take in light of that anger, are those God honoring and God glorifying? Would God be okay with putting his stamp of approval on that action? So you're angry that your sister yelled at you and was mean to you. Okay, God doesn't love that. That's sin. Is God going to be okay with you going and being mean back to her? Is God going to be okay with you yelling at her? No. And so the anger in the moment, you can see the problems that come with just running to call everything righteous anger. And so it's for us, it is far more concerned with, why is my heart running so quickly to anger, than is my anger righteous. We should be a little bit more concerned with, why am I so angry right now, and evaluating that, and why is my heart so prone to anger, than getting angry and then saying, well, I think it was righteous, so I don't need to confess that. Just working more to be more aware of why we're angry, I think, is more of the benefit to that.